Welcome back to Rugby from the Stands. New Zealand have started the Dave Rennie era with 3 wins. They've scored 121 points across 3 games. They've put 40 on Ireland. And honestly, as an All Blacks fan, it's very easy to get excited about this. And I am excited about it. But before we get carried away, I also remember July 2024. Razor started with 3 out of 3. Then in July 2025, Razor also gave us a start of 3 out of 3. Both times, we thought the team might be building towards something. But by the end of last season, the All Blacks, in the words of David Kirk, were not on the right trajectory to win the World Cup, is what they decided. And so out goes Razor Robertson, and in comes Dave Rennie. And before I get too excited with the 3 results that we just saw, I wanted to slow myself down a little bit and actually check this properly. Across Rennie's first 3 games, has the team actually improved from week to week? Is there anything in the way that they're playing that feels more sustainable than what we saw under Razor? And if there is, where are the warning signs? Because 3 wins was great. I'm obviously not complaining about 3 wins. I just don't think the record can answer those questions by itself. So this first chart is simply the winning margin across the opening 3 tests of each July over the last 3 years, including this one. Razor's first season is over here in grey. They beat England by 1 point, then by 7 points, and then they beat Fiji by 42 points in San Diego. In 2025, they beat France by 4, then 26, which was arguably their best performance of the entire 2025 season, especially that first 40 minutes. And then in the last game, they beat France by 10 points. And Rennie's first 3 games are here in green or teal. 2 points against France, 30 against Italy, and 19 against Ireland. Every one of those teams began 3 out of 3. So you can already see why the final record doesn't help us very much. A 42-point win over Fiji can make 1 July look as though it finished brilliantly. A 26-point win in the second French test can make another July look as though the team had suddenly taken off. And then you get Rennie. They had a 2-point escape, a big win over Italy, and a pretty convincing win over Ireland. So that shape looks encouraging. But the opponents change every week. So winning margin is still a very rough way to judge progression. And I do want to be fair about the opposition this year as well. France weren't at full strength this year, but they were much stronger than last year's touring party. And I would also argue with people who'd say that this is a quote-unquote B team. Other than Louis Bielbiere and maybe Movaka and Dupont, actually, based on the form that Luku has been having this year, it could be argued that actually it was their strongest team that was playing in New Zealand this year. I think Movaka and a few other forwards might be the only additions that were missing, but overall I think that was a very, very strong French team. Italy are also a much better side than their old reputation. They beat Scotland and they beat England for the first time in this year's Six Nations. So New Zealand obviously should beat them at home, of course, but that 47-17 result wasn't completely meaningless. Ireland had finished the Six Nations with 4 straight wins. They put 42 points on England at Twickenham and 43 on Scotland in their final match. So they may not be at the absolute peak of the last World Cup cycle, but they arrived in decent form. So these were easy games that the All Blacks had to play, especially with this new Nations Championship format as well. But that's the sample that we have. So let's see what happened inside it. This chart follows 5 numbers from France through Italy and into the Ireland game. Let's start at the top with lightning quick ball. Against France, 83% of New Zealand's ruck ball arrived at lightning quick ball or inside 3 seconds. That is obviously ridiculously quick. Against Italy, it dipped a bit to 68%, and against Ireland, it dropped again to 62%. If tempo was the whole plan, you might expect the attack to get worse as that numbers came down. But now look at what happened underneath it. Territory went from 47% against France to 55% against Ireland. New Zealand kicked 17 times in the first match and 24 times in the third. They lost 13 turnovers against France, 13 turnovers against Italy, and only 9 against Ireland. And the line breaks that they conceded fell from 12 that they conceded against France to 7 against Italy to 5 against Ireland. This is where I started to feel a bit more confident about what we were watching. The France game was loose. It was fun. It was an absolute treat to watch. It was quick. Both teams found space. It was an absolute cracking game. By the Ireland game, the All Blacks were more willing to put the ball downfield. They spent more time in the right half. They gave Ireland fewer cheap possessions, and when Ireland attacked, New Zealand weren't being opened up every few minutes. I obviously can't prove from these 5 numbers that the coaches deliberately decided to slow the ruck down. Ireland may simply have made quick ball harder to find, but what matters to me is how New Zealand responded when that easy speed disappeared. They didn't keep forcing the same picture. They kicked more, they held territory, they protected the ball better. And I know what the next question is because I also had the same question. Did all that control take something away from the attack? Well, the top of this chart is tries scored. 5 against France, it went up to 7 against Italy, and 6 against Ireland. So the try count stayed high throughout the window. But underneath that, I've got points scored per entry into the opposition 22. Basically, what this is asking is every time New Zealand entered the opposition 22, their red zone, how much points did they come away with every entry? They scored 3.7 points per entry against France, 3.6 against Italy, which are decent numbers, and 4.4 against Ireland. So Ireland was actually the most efficient attacking performance of the 3, even though it had the lowest quick ball percentage. Now, there were only 9 entries in that match, so we need to be careful. But they still scored 6 times from those opportunities. When they got close, they didn't need endless phases and repeat visits. They finished, and they were clinical. And on the field, that is what a more mature attacking game should give you. You don't have to manufacture speed from every ruck in your own half. Sometimes you kick, make the opposition come back at you, and wait for the next useful picture. When you finally reach the 22, you have to make that visit count. That Ireland performance is the one that changed my mind a little bit. They were still scoring, and the rest of the game looked much tidier. Now, we can put all 3 Julys together. The chart on the left is points per 22 entry. High means New Zealand got more scoreboard return every time that they reached the opposition 22. The chart on the right is line breaks conceded. So over there, obviously, lower is better. Let's start with the Razor in 2024, which is the gray line. The attacking return rose from 1.6 points per entry to 2.5 and then 3.6 against Fiji. At the same time, look at the line breaks conceded. It went from 3 to 5 to 6. There was attacking improvement in those numbers, while the defense became a little more open each week. Razor's 2025 line is more interesting. Attacking efficiency went from 2.3 against France. It shot up to 4.3 in the second test, and then it fell to 2 in the third test. Defensively, though, they improved every week. 4 line breaks conceded, then 3 line breaks conceded, and then only 2. So Razor's 2nd July did show progress. The defense tightened up across that series. The uncertainty was all on the attacking side, where that huge second test return in that first half kind of disappeared in the second half and also a week later. And because all 3 games were against a weakened French touring squad, we still didn't know whether any of it would actually translate into the Rugby Championship. Rennie's line has a different shape. The attacking return starts at 3.7, it stays at 3.6 against Italy, and it finishes at 4.4. So even in the first match, the floor was already quite high. The defense started badly, though. 12 line breaks against France is a lot. It then falls to 7 against Italy, and then they tightened up the defense, and they only gave away 5 line breaks against Ireland. So the defense is getting better across the 3 games, and the attack hasn't dropped away. I'm still wary of making massive calls from just 3 matches, obviously. Who you play against matters, the game state matters, and a lot of things, obviously, play a part in the end result. But based on what we have, the Dave Rennie's All Blacks have managed to fix their first problem, which was giving away far too many line breaks. They've dropped it down to just 5 against Ireland from 12 versus France. But there's another issue that we have to deal with here. Rennie's All Blacks conceded 3 tries per game across this entire window. Razor's 2024 team only conceded 1.7, and the 2025 Razors All Blacks conceded only 2 tries per game. But if we only compare those raw averages, Rennie's defense looks obviously quite worse. So I went through the Six Nations data to see whether scoring has changed. On the left, you can see tries per team per match rise from 2.6 in 2024 to 3.6 in 2025, and then 3.7 this year. That's a 41% rise across 2 seasons. Line breaks went from 5.2 per team per match to 6.2 in 2025, and then 7.1. So that's again up 37%. The same 6 teams are involved every year, which makes this a useful comparison. It still only tells us what happened in the Six Nations. I'm not using it to claim that every international competition has moved in exactly the same way. But if you did watch my video about the different leagues, you'll also see that try scoring has gone up, that line breaks have also gone up across the 3 years. And what this Six Nations data also does tell us is that France, Italy, and Ireland, they came out of a tournament where attacks were finding more space and scoring more tries than they were a couple of years ago. So 3 tries conceded in 2026 carries a different context from 3 tries conceded in 2024. Context can also become a convenient excuse, though. If everybody is scoring more, we still need to ask whether New Zealand actually stopped these opponents from producing what they normally produce. The hollow circles here show each opponent's average in the 2026 Six Nations. The teal circles show what they produced against New Zealand. We'll start with France. France averaged 6 tries in the Six Nations and scored 4 against the All Blacks. That part looks good for New Zealand. Their line breaks went the other way, though. France averaged 11.4 and made 12 against New Zealand. Italy averaged 1.8 tries and 6.4 line breaks. Against New Zealand, they scored 2 tries and made 7 line breaks, basically around their average output, slightly above it, though. Then we get to Ireland. Ireland averaged 4 tries and 7 line breaks in their Six Nations this year. New Zealand held them to 3 tries and 5 line breaks. So that third game is the first time where both those metrics are moving clearly in New Zealand's favor. Across all 3 opponents, their Six Nations average was 3.93 tries and 8.27 line breaks. Against New Zealand, it came down to 3 tries and 8 line breaks. The overall line break reduction is obviously tiny, and France did plenty of damage in that opening game. I don't think the numbers support calling this a great defensive window from start to finish, but what they do support is the progression we saw earlier. By the third test, New Zealand held a good attacking side below its recent level in both categories. That is obviously very encouraging. The sample is still very small, and home match against Ireland is a very different proposition as opposed to playing South Africa in South Africa next month. So, which brings me back to Razor, because his July numbers didn't really collapse until the opponents and conditions changed. So this chart compares Razor's 2025 July series with the Rugby Championship that followed it. Everything here is averaged per game. Possession fell from 58.7% to 48.8% in the Rugby Championship. Territory fell from 58.3 to 46.7. Rucks won dropped from 131 a game to 80. Rucks 1 basically means that this is another proxy to gauge how many phases were the All Blacks able to put together. So in July, Razor's team were able to put 131 phases on average, but then when it came to the Rugby Championship against Argentina, Australia, and South Africa, that number went down to 80. Entries into the opposition 22 almost halved from 12.3 to 6.5, and line breaks fell from 9.3 to 4.2. So picture what that looked like. New Zealand had less of the ball, played from worse parts of the field, built fewer phases, and reached the opposition 22 about 6 times a game. The interesting number is that last one. Points per 22 entry went up from 2.87 in July to 3.28. So when they did reach the 22, they could still score. They just weren't getting there often enough. There is one other number at the bottom of the chart that I think is worth sitting with. Passes per ruck rose from 1.74 in July to 2.11 in the Rugby Championship. Total passes fell from 226 to 165. So they had fewer rucks and threw fewer passes overall. But when they did have a phase, they moved the ball more times before the next ruck. Some of that will be game state. A team that's behind will naturally chase the game and throw more passes. The Rugby Championship opponents were also far stronger than the French touring side that year. Still, this is the part of Razor's decline that worried me most. New Zealand lost access to the areas where its attack could hurt teams. Once the game became harder, the side struggled to win territory, build pressure, and create another entry. And while the attack was searching for those chances, the defense had to absorb a lot more rugby. Tackles made went from 131 per game in July to 156 in the Rugby Championship. Missed tackles rose from 11 to almost 27 per game. Tackle completion dropped from 92.3% to 85.2%. Opposition post-contact meters went from 1.66 per carry to 2.5. I've used the per carry number here because the raw total gets inflated whenever the opposition simply carries more often. Penalties also climbed from 6.3 to 10.5 per game. These numbers all moved at the same time. New Zealand defended more often, missed more tackles, gave up more meters after contact, and conceded more penalties. I can't tell you that fatigue caused all of it. South Africa and Argentina are much more physical compared to the French that toured New Zealand in July last year. That alone will move the contact numbers, but this is where the Rugby Championship games became so hard to control. Lose the territory battle, defend another long set, get knocked backwards, and eventually somebody's laid off the floor or slow folding around the corner. Then comes the penalty, another line out, and another defensive set. Those problems feed each other. And this is the warning for Rennie, because one of these numbers is already familiar. Razor's team made 156 tackles per match during that Rugby Championship. Rennie's team has made 157 per match across its first 3 games. They handled that workload in July. I'm not sure I want to see them carrying it into the power games later in the year. So these are the numbers that I'm saving for the rest of 2026. They obviously aren't targets, and I don't think one bad result against South Africa or a couple of bad results against South Africa should turn any of them into a pass or fail test. They're simply our July baseline. New Zealand created 10.3 entries into the opposition 22 per game and scored 3.9 points from each one. That combination is really important. The Razor side remained reasonably efficient once it reached the 22. Some of you will know Hugh Griffin. He's a great YouTuber. Go check out his stuff. Last year, he had a bit of criticism of the Razor era All Blacks of 2025. He found that Razor's All Blacks made far too many passes in their games. And his number that he found was 1.8 passes per ruck. The All Blacks were passing close to 2 passes per ruck. And whenever we hit that number, we lost, which is corroborated in the data. Now, Rennie's All Blacks also passed at that number in the first couple of games as well. However, against Ireland, we were at 1.78, and the Irish were over 2 passes per ruck. which is where Hugh Griffin says is the sweet spot. You want your opposition to be passing more ball, and you want to be passing less per ruck, and which is exactly what we did against Ireland. That shows more control. However, because of the first two games, our average over the three games is 1.92, and it gives us something to watch across the rest of the year. Will the All Blacks keep passing because there's more space, or will the All Blacks get over the gain line first? Or are they going to be going side to side because the forwards weren't creating a better option? The All Blacks obviously this year lost 11.7 turnovers per game in these first three games. But obviously that improved against Ireland, where they lost only 9. But they conceded 8 line breaks per game. Although again, against the Irish, that fell from 12 in the first game to 5 in the third test. The tackle count is 156.7. The line out is sitting at 82.7%. Again, cause for concern. And they conceded 8.3 penalties per game. The win against Ireland obviously makes me feel much better about the attack. I think that's the model that we want to replicate against some of the stronger teams. The kicking balance and the contact work was fantastic. The things I'll be nervous about against South Africa are the entry count, the tackle load, and that line out number. And of course, that scrum as well. So is this a honeymoon? After going through the numbers, I think the improvement across these three games are real. The France match gave us a very dangerous All Black attack and a defense that was far too easy to break. Against Ireland, the attack was still producing 6 tries, while New Zealand kicked more, won more territory, lost less ball, and conceded only 5 line breaks. That feels like a team that is progressing well, that's learning during that window. I didn't always feel that balance in Razor's first 2 Julys. It never felt like there was any direction in terms of where they were trending. I'm still waiting before I judge the whole Rennie regime, obviously. 3 home tests are nowhere near enough, and Razor's own story also shows us why. His 2025 side tightened the defense in July, but then lost possession, territory, and attacking access when the Rugby Championship arrived. So for now, I'm encouraged, probably more encouraged than I expected to be when I started pulling this together. The Ireland performance gave us something solid to work with, and the rest of the year will tell us whether it can be replicated. Let me know which number you're watching the most closely. Is it the 22 entries? Is it the tackle count, the line out and the set piece, or something that you saw on the field that this data missed completely? I'm genuinely curious what's on everyone's minds, because I can see why people are already all in on Rennie. I'm just keeping a little bit of space for what South Africa and maybe the Autumn Nations might teach us. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you on the next one.